Hey there, and welcome back to Transformers the Game. As you recall, in the last episode, we did the high-res versus low-res comparison for the Hunt for Sam Witwicky, which was fine, I guess. And now, we are going back to the Autobot side of the campaign with Inside Hoover Dam, which is probably gonna be one of the least interesting episodes that I do. But, maybe it'll surprise us. Let's find out. And here we are, inside Hoover Dam. Ooh, and I can already see a few distinct environmental differences in this place. Perhaps there's more to this level than I thought. Well, before we go covering about the environment specifically, let's have a look at our old friend 07 Bumblebee. First, here is the high-res 07 Bumblebee that we are all used to. I mean, he's pretty defined. Nothing to really complain about, I guess. Looks fine. And here is the low-res 07 Bumblebee. Well, it's pretty much what you would expect. He's basically a simplified version of the high-res version. But, for what it's worth, it looks like they matched his pieces pretty closely with each other. I mean, obviously high-res is way more defined, of course, but as far as general proportions go, they seem pretty even. Not seeing a whole lot of noteworthy distinctions here. Well, the first change I notice is on his crotch license plate. The low-res seems to have a dark black license plate that doesn't even seem legible. Just looks like gibberish. Compared to the high-res, which you can actually read. Even though it isn't technically the license plate he used in the movie, it is at least legible. Oh, it looks like the small cylinder pieces on his shoulder are different colors. In high-res, they appear as red, yet in low-res, they appear silver. Now, if my memory is correct, I believe high-res is right. They are indeed supposed to be red. So, low-res is probably based on an older design again. It also looks like there's some chest armor on his side that is silver in high-res, but yellow in low. Now, I think low-res might be right here. Yes, that armor is indeed supposed to be yellow. I don't think I even covered that in my enhanced version. Well, I'll take note of that for future reference. But those few distinctions aside, I'm really not seeing a whole lot of noteworthy differences. Alright, well, let's move over to textures. So, low-res is of course the same minuscule gibberish that we are used to. You know, you really can't make a whole lot out of that. What a primitive quality, huh? All these symbol lines, flat colors, just a really dull styling. Compare that to the high-res, which has the same free textures for the upper body, lower body, and inner parts. But otherwise, nothing really special to mention. So, shifting over to vehicle mode, we have a pretty similar situation from what we saw in robot mode. The designs between the high-res and low-res models seem to resemble each other pretty closely. I mean, of course, obviously, low-res is much more primitive looking, but generally their styles and proportions match up pretty closely. Well, I do see that the low-res's headlights are clipping through him. They're not even lined up properly, compared to the high-res, which does indeed seem to be, well, at least better placed. Low-res looks a little skinnier. Not by a lot, but decent enough that you could actually notice. I see his license plate is different again. Low-res has the background as black, compared to the high-res, which is white. Must have been a concept design, I guess. And a bit off course here, but it has always bothered me how out of place 07 Bumblebee's wheels are. They just seem to stick out too much. I don't know what it is. Maybe they're too low and too far out, but they have always looked off to me. Well, looking at Bumblebee's car textures, you get, well, more of the same, I guess. Not a whole lot of yellow. Again, that's a really common trend with these low-res characters. They do not have a whole lot of color. So, I can only imagine that the skinning potential for these guys is very low. Low, because it's low-res. Okay. Man, his license plate texture is really big. And that's taking into account that this is a 256 by 256 texture. Don't know why they felt the need to make it so big. I mean, I guess if you're gonna draw all your color from one spot, you get more options for bigger text, I suppose. Compared to the high-res, which is a bit more defined, but also crazy flat. Yeah, there's no real definition here. And what you do have is very, I don't know, pixely. Just doesn't look that great. He's also got the interior texture, which is, fine, I guess. Nothing really to complain about. It's not flat, at least, so you get some decent details out of it. Huh. Alright, well, I think that's all I can say for 07 Bumblebee. Why don't we jump back to the map and see just how different it is between low and high. And it appears that the low and high versions of Hoover Dam are quite a bit more different than I originally expected. In general, it seems that low res has a much more bolder appearance. I don't know if this will register in the footage, but from the screenshots I've taken, yeah, it's way bolder. High res has this kind of duller look to it, which is the same thing I mentioned about the main menu in the first episode. But, general shading aside, there are a lot more design distinctions than I was originally expecting. A lot of the pipe placements are drastically different from one another. Some sections that have pipes in one don't have any pipes in the other version. There's also a lot more lighting in the high-res version. A lot of these towers have like some red illumination coming from somewhere, but the low-res does not. And another really distinct feature is that high-res has these overhead lights that low-res does not have at all. That's quite an interesting change. It also appears that low-res has some decals on the towers. There's a M4 logo on that tower over there that high-res does not have. Very interesting. Moving to another angle, we get a better look at the ground level, which is pretty similar for the most part. Most of the object placements seem to line up with one another, but high-res has some additional columns, I guess, on the right edge that low-res doesn't even have. Not really anything insanely special, but still interesting. Well, I'd say we covered the basics of the Hoover interior map. Let's commence our journey for the chapter to see what else turns up. Let's bust into the first stop on our tour, which is the control room, which has a totally different atmosphere going on here. Low-res has this really dull, simple feel to it, you know? It just looks like a room that's got a few computers in it, but otherwise isn't anything really special. Compare that to the high-res, which has a totally different feel to it. It's got like a faint dark blue lighting to it, with a few screens on the center pillar. It has a small brick pattern compared to the whatever the low-res is using. Wow, that is way more distinct than I thought. Yeah, high-res looks way nicer. That's cool. Let's keep the heat on with one of my favorite places, tunnel vision. My favorite level. To be honest, as time has gone on, I haven't feared this level nearly as much. Maybe I've just played it so much that it's lost its intimidation factor to me, but I still don't like it that much. But it's not quite as bad anymore. Well, let's take a look at the tunnels themselves, and you will find some massive distinctions with this. The low-res tunnels, as you can see, are very smooth, very dull. You know, not a lot of life in this place at all. Compared to the high-res, which is, I'd swear we were in a different game. That is so much more detailed. Just look at that. Wow. What a change. It's amazing what a grittier texture job and a few extra lights will do to a place, huh? Wow, that might be one of the greatest distinctions between low-res and high-res maps I've ever seen right here. They really skipped out on the low-res tunnels, didn't they? Yeah, high-res just looks, so good. And it even gets even more detailed as we go further down. Because as you can see, the low-res has some incredibly dull sidelines. You know, all that's there are a few lights and a few doors. Not much else. Compare that to the high-res, you get, wow, actually some geometry changes, huh? The sidelines are a lot wider. You get some detailed scaffolding in the middle, and just, wow, way more details in general. Got some fences, some panels and tubing, piping, all that stuff in high-res that low-res just left blank. Wow, that is crazy. I did not realize how dull low-res looked. That just looks, it's like a simple chamber, and let's just like, yeah, let's just leave it there and call it a day. That is so dull. Oh my goodness. Wow, that is crazy impressive what they did here. Well, if the tunnels and the control room are any indication, I wonder how different the containment lab will be. And here we are in our last stop, the containment lab, in the final mission, Waking Giant, which has officially probably become my least favorite level in this entire game. And strangely enough, it was even worse to play on low res, but not for the reason you think. This is probably the only time I've encountered a gameplay alteration in low res that made it different than high res. I'll explain that more in a bit, but first, we have another character to mention, the Energon drones. Surprisingly enough, these guys are no different between low res and high res at all. Yeah, I was honestly surprised. They are exactly the same. There are no higher quality versions, no sharper textures, nothing. They're the same skinny little beetle with the same dull reflection texture. There is literally nothing new going on here. So, let's take a look at the containment lab itself. And surprisingly, the containment lab is not quite as different compared to the tunnels and control room. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some differences, of course, but nothing nearly to the level that we saw in the control room and the tunnels. There are, of course, some duller textures in the low res, of course, but nothing really eye-popping. But, from what I do see, high res actually has some beams in that crevice over there that low res didn't even bother to include. And the section that the Allspark is standing on is a bit of a different shape. You've got like 2 layers for the low res and 4 steps for the high res. Low res also has a yellow-black caution line for the border, and high is just plain yellow. The clamps are a little different as well. Low res has these bigger or wider clamps. They seem to go around a little more, and high res just seems a little dinkier. Speaking of the cube itself, low res is a lot simpler. There's a lot less scarring and probably a lot less detailing going on, and the high res is actually animated with its glow, which is a subtle but nice feature. And up ahead in the distance, we have Megatron on ice, which, aside from the fact that they're using the high-res and low-res models respectively, there aren't too many differences here. Though high-res Megatron does have some weird pink glow at his feet. Not sure what's going on there. Maybe a shader bug, perhaps? I'm not really sure. But low-res has some more detailing, ironically, on that right column. Low-res just looks super dull, but high-res has this nice detailed paneling going on. That is odd. Wait, and now high-res has some colored pipes where low-res does not? You need to make up your mind, game. Do you want to be more detailed or not? Because you're just throwing me mixed signals now. But anyway, going back to what I was saying earlier, playing this mission in low-res actually gave me a harder time than it did in high-res. Normally, when I deal with Megatron, I usually get a decent amount of breathing room that I can get to the nitrogen tanks and take them down. However, in my first low-res playthrough, I got obliterated by him. Seriously, I had like no breathing room after he fired. Within seconds after he fired, he fires again. And that is a really hard attack to avoid. I even tried going into vehicle mode, but I just couldn't get away. The second I got back there, I was down on the ground again. So much so to the point that I died. I really can't say how. Digital Arctic mentioned that it could have been a result of different FPS values, but I will tell you that I did not have nearly as bad as a time on high-res. And that is probably the only instance of that I will ever see during this series. It was just really odd that I could be obliterated like this. I just didn't expect resolution to have effect on gameplay, but apparently it can, because I just could not get away. But in the end, I did eventually end up victorious. But with that level completed, we can wrap up our tour of Inside Hoover Dam. Man, I have to say, the design elements between low res and high, especially in the tunnels, huge difference, just huge. High res looks so much better with all those extra pieces and parts they added, just looks so much more lived in and real. Seriously, high res all the way here. Well, that is all I can say for Inside Hoover Dam. In the next episode, we will be journeying back to the Decepticon campaign for what is going to be the most infuriating comparison that I will do. Seriously, I'm going to be really salty next episode, and you'll probably see why, or you might already know why, because it's got one of the worst issues of any map ever. And you've all seen it. If you're playing on high res, you've seen it. You know what I'm talking about. But that's for another time. That is all I have to say for Inside Hoover Dam. Hope you all found this interesting as I did. And I will see you in the next episode where we gather a force of stupid. Goodbye!